2024 has been an amazing year for music. All of my favorite artists have released something new, and some of my favorite music of all time has been released just this year. This is to say that it really means a lot to me when I say Reincarnated by Kendrick Lamar is the best song that I've listened to this last year. It deeply reflects on the brokenness of the music industry, the intergenerational effect of this corruption, and explores, then inverts, a traditional mythical story. There's so much to explore in this short track, but to understand why this work of art had so much of an impact on me, I first need to explore something else. The artist I listened to most this last year was Nick Cave. His music is deep and contemplative, and he's an articulate writer who regularly contributes to his incredible blog, The Red Hand Files. However, it isn't his writing or music that is pertinent to the subject of this piece. It's his ceramics. During the pandemic, Nick Cave took up ceramics on a whim. One day, early on in his work, he had a sudden desire to take red glaze and create a traditional depiction of the devil. From this, he was further inspired to create an entire series inspired by Victorian Staffordshire figurines, the type of ceramic pieces your grandmother might have had on her mantelpiece. Nick Cave's 13 ceramic figurines, originally displayed at a gallery in Brussels, depicted a series of events across the fictionalized life of the devil. Each of these pieces is filled with symbolism and care and deserves a video of their own. One thing that's quite apparent when considering these pieces is that the devil takes on very human features. Cave takes some of the traditional mythology and twists it. First, the devil is born a solitary baby, resting against a red horse, like that of the Red Horseman of the Apocalypse, a harbinger of war, brother killing brother. The second depicts the child devil inheriting the world, as the devil is often called the ruler of this world, as opposed to the ruler of the next. On the other end of the devil's life, we see the twists and failures he faces. We see the devil kill his firstborn, a scene reminiscent of the binding of Isaac. Yet, the golden lamb ready for sacrifice is completely ignored. The devil is then separated from the world. He holds a look of frustration as the world seems gentle and kind without him. And then the most important moment appears suddenly, the devil in remorse. This statue shows a very simple scene of the devil leaning over in tears. But what is most noteworthy is that the devil in the scene bears a striking resemblance to the artist himself. Through this, the entire series is recontextualized as a retelling of the artist's own life.
In this respect, I think the devil gave me a kind of disguise. It was just a way of coming to certain realizations about things that were happening in my life in disguise. So it was never me, but it was, in the end, very much so. And I guess the devil was allowing me to look at certain things that went on through my life from a point of view of sin, by attaching a pair of horns to myself, if that makes any sense.
By the end of the project, the devil was revealed to be a thinly veiled version of himself, only disguised by a pair of devil's horns. Much has been made of the public feud between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Drake by all means represents the heights of the music industry, a best-selling artist and all-around commercial success. Like many musicians, he is surrounded by ghostwriters, facilitating his brand image at the peak of the industry. The industry is an interesting turn of phrase, and it's often one that Kendrick Lamar has used with no lack of contempt. The industry can be thought of as the commercializing force that seeks to monetize and exploit untapped sections of the music market. In the eyes of the industry, music is no longer art that moves the masses to contemplation, but is now solely entertainment. A distraction, an escape from hard times, if I'm being generous, and the sedation of the masses, if I'm being honest. Who needs to consider the pain of those around you if you can just plug up your ears and listen to a poppy beat and forget yourself? In reading the script back, I find it funny that I use the word poppy here. The poppy is the flower from which opium is produced. Is this commercialism the opium of the masses? It also reminded me of a Kendrick line from one of his recent songs, speaking directly to Drake. I make music that electrifies them. You make music that pacifies them. Kendrick's image stands in stark contrast to the industry's vision of art and music. Living a significant amount of his life in Compton, a place not unfamiliar with gang violence, suffering, and kids dying far too young, Kendrick has used his art to try and impact the places closest to him. His music serves as an exploration of himself and his relationship with his community and the broader culture. In every line, you can see Kendrick, the great artist, and Kendrick, the man struggling with his imperfections. In his albums, he consistently explores how he has fallen short, and how pride is a particular foe of his. So, in this public battle of giants, the entire culture saw both the embodiment of the industry's golden child and the authentic artist compete for the hearts and minds of the public consciousness. My interest is in the lyrical contents of the song. Others will be much better equipped to elaborate on how Kendrick skillfully plays tribute to both Tupac and West Coast hip-hop on the whole, throughout GNX and Reincarnated. I'll just speak to what I know. And before I begin my analysis, if you haven't yet, I highly recommend leaving this video and coming back after you've listened to the song. There's a magic to the song that I don't want to detract from if you've never heard it before. The song follows a somewhat simple structure. In the first section, we have the narrator expounding on his experience of a fire burning from within. He finds that each day he is changing, as if shedding off portions of himself, yet he still realizes that a third of himself is twisted and demented. He feels like he's in a battle with his own soul. The image of shedding is reminiscent of a snake, which is our first hint to where the song will go. The narrator then states he has participated in a session of past life regression, a hypnotherapy technique used to try and summon the memories of past lives to address the current problems and place in life the patient is experiencing. In the second portion of the song, the narrator begins to recount some of the life stories that the hypnotherapy conjured up. First, the narrator finds himself transported to Michigan in 1947. He's a rebel, kicked out of his father's house. It's important to note that he says this is due to his own inability to listen. Now, as a wanderer far from home, the narrator in this life searches for a new one. During the search, he uses his incredible music ability to amass a fortune. He finds pleasure in the adoration of the masses and the women that fall at his feet, until he inevitably falls under the weight of the lies, lust for wealth, and gluttony. In the next life, our narrator is now a woman, performing club to club. She's also gifted with otherworldly music ability and enchants the crowds that gather each night to see her performance. The story ends just like the first. She too falls to the temptation of sex and drugs, and dies. In the third section of the song, the narrator reveals, in this current life, he is Kendrick Lamar. As an artist like the others, he has faced many of the temptations that the past lives have fallen to. But he sees himself as someone who is stepping closer to who he was made to be. Like in the first life, Kendrick states that he was also kicked out of his father's house. But in his case, after wrestling with his pride, Kendrick has forgiven him and realized how he let his ego lead him to resent his father. In this moment, the song turns. Kendrick begins to have a conversation with God, the ultimate vision of a father, bringing some more meaning to the past lines. Now, Kendrick hints to us that this struggle with the father has two sides to it, one earthly and one spiritual. Pleading with God, Kendrick asks if he has finally broken the curse. The generations fell and died one after the other, each falling into traps. The dark side of music, the industry. It may not be dishonest to name it mammon, often associated with the worship of worldly success and wealth. St. Gregory of Nyssa wrote that mammon could be considered yet another name of the devil, the king of this world. God, in response, answers Kendrick's question. He's unmoved and flatly says that Kendrick's pride will have to die. Kendrick then recounts all he has done to address the corruption and brokenness of the industry. He's funded great causes, he has lifted up other artists sharing in the attention and fame, and has worked to bring peace to his home in LA. God exposes this last point is not a total truth. Kendrick loves war. The public feud between himself and Drake is a clear example of this. The entire fight started when Drake and Kendrick were both listed as being among the top 3 rappers. Kendrick's pride took offense and stated that the top 3 meant nothing to him, and that he stood above all the rest. God reminds Kendrick that each person is a person just like you or any other. If you can't forgive them, how can you expect them to forgive you? And then the voice of God brings a major twist into the narrative. In talking about Kendrick, he retells the account of Lucifer falling from heaven, and recounting the mythology about Lucifer as the greatest among the Lord's choir. In this telling, he fell to earth for rehabilitation, not as punishment or psychosis as written in the song. Through this, we see Lucifer as the spirit of music, containing all the glories of a holy choir and all the brokenness of a fallen angel, and how Kendrick sees himself as an embodiment of this force, and is actively trying to break away the art from the painful corruption that has followed it. In the song, the passage Isaiah 14 is specifically mentioned. This is a reference to a passage that's often talked about as the origin of the legends around Lucifer as a figure. The passage is Isaiah 14, 12 through 15, which reads, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. Lucifer's introduction to the themes of the song provides a new lens we can use to interpret the previous sections. The father kicking his son out of the home has major parallels to the fallen angel narrative. Lucifer is also traditionally associated with pride. Famously, Dante placed Satan in the center of the lowest circle of hell, the circle of pride. The symbolism and narratives are tightly woven together here. In the light of this, Kendrick and God have a back and forth. God's voice calls out the ways that Kendrick has fallen short and asks how he's going to respond. In reply, Kendrick vows to capture light, inspire, bring understanding to the people, pursue peace, and mourn the mistakes he's made. In this moment, the two are reconciled. Kendrick has repented, or literally turned away from how he was living, and is returning back. And God in response says in celebration, then let's rejoice where we're at. This image is very reminiscent of the narrative of the prodigal son. In the Gospels, Christ tells the story of a young man who despises his father, and asks for his inheritance early so he can leave his father's house. The father relents, and their relationship is severed. The young man lives his life of worldly pleasures, pursuing parties, drink, and women, until the inheritance was all spent. Without anywhere else to go, he got a job feeding pigs and was so hungry that he desperately wanted to eat the pig slop. At the end of his rope, he decided to return home, at the off chance his father would just tell him off and hire him on as a servant, who would at least be fed some real food. The young man returns to his father's estate, and the father sees him approaching far off. The father takes no time to put on proper clothes and runs out in a robe. He runs directly to his son and threw his arms around him. The son tries to apologize, but the father called to the house to bring him clothes, shoes, and jewelry. At once, the father called for an expensive meal to be prepared to celebrate his son who returned home. Here we make another quick diversion to consider the move that Kendrick Lamar makes in this final section of the song. There's a remarkable similarity between St. Brigid and the Brigid of mythology. I'll make no attempt here to claim that I have any knowledge of either Celtic mythology or Irish saints, but I don't have to question the historicity of the human St. Brigid to point this out. The Brigid, a pagan myth, was beloved by poets and had two sisters. One was a patroness of smithing, and the other was often associated with healing. Also, both of them were named Brigid. St. Brigid brings all three together. This is no coincidence. Whether or not St. Brigid walked among us, she nonetheless served a specific purpose in leading the early Irish pagans on their journey to become Christians. When considering their old ways, some of which they knew would have to change in the light of the truth that had confronted them, they also saw glimpses of beauty in their old ways. So, just as the pagan men and women entered the waters to be baptized, symboling a death of the old and the birth of the new, so too was Brigid baptized. Down went the sacrifices, festivals, and devotion, and emerged a saint, with patronage, a feast day, and loyal to the triune God to which she was baptized. In the eyes of the people, Brigid had been saved. They did not need to abandon all of what made them Irish in order to become Catholic. Much to the contrary, these Irish pagans saw St. Brigid as the proper vision of Ireland. The evil, sin, and shame had been washed away, and beautiful Brigid was no longer divided as three sisters, but unified as a singular saint. Some have interpreted Reincarnated as a type of attempt to conjure up a Rolling Stones type of sympathy for the devil, but this fails to acknowledge the framework that Kendrick has continually used and even presents in this song. The last line is the most important line to interpret this track. I rewrote the devil's story just to take our power back. Carnated. In this final twist, Kendrick, in recounting Lucifer's fall and the legends around his musical ability, he takes the story that's been so beautiful and takes it away from Lucifer himself. It's as if Kendrick says to Lucifer, you are not even worth this beautiful story. Kendrick takes a narrative and makes it his own. The story that once was told of deep brokenness is turned into a story of redemption, something that Lucifer could never hope to attain. Reincarnated by no means defends the devil. Kendrick is quite outspoken about many things, and when he sees evil, he's not afraid to say that the devil is behind it. Through this song, he denounces evil and leaves it no foothold. The very last word of the song, Kendrick leaves incomplete, using elision, and this leaves two potentials open for the word's interpretation. For one, it could just match the rest of the song, where Kendrick says, reincarnated, indicating a cycle of refinement that he finds himself going through. But it could also be interpreted as the word Incarnated. Incarnated implies a certain finality, a certain perfection. There's no need to go through the cycle anymore. The heights are reached. Nick Cave's project served as a form of reflection and retrospection, not through the figures of saints or Christ, but through the opposite lens, through his own sins and failings. The resolution comes in the last 3 scenes. First is the devil's last dance. An aged devil decides to dance as a response to his remorse, to live despite his mistakes, using art to process all that he is and has been. Next is the devil bleeds to death. There's the agony in his eyes as he cries out to the heavens, and his blood flows into what looks like a garden. Lastly, the devil is forgiven. His body is washed up on a beach. His gray body is withered down to skin and bones. And seated next to him is a child that bears a remarkable similarity to the one that the devil himself sacrificed on the altar, his firstborn. This is the image of baptism in the waters, the death of the old and the shred of life that is rescued purely through love and reconciliation. In both Kendrick's music and Cave's Victorian Staffordshire figurines, the image of the devil is used not as a backward attempt at trying to reconcile evil, but a skillful separation of the good from the corrupted state that has taken hold. When Nick Cave looks at himself as the devil, it's an expression of his pain, regret, shame, and brokenness. When Kendrick speaks of himself as the devil, it's taking back the good from the hands of the devil and casting the evil back down to be forgotten. Like each one of us, we're all a mix of divine goodness and brutal corruption. The ultimate hope is that the evil is torn away, the steel trap of lust, every hateful impulse to hurt a friend, and the inescapable discontentment that haunts us no matter where we go. And that the good would be all that's left: brotherhood, friendship, gathering around the dinner table with those we once thought were our enemies. And through reconciliation, we found new friends. As stated before, this is exactly what the symbol of baptism represents. To push this image further, we see the symbolism around Jesus doing this too. A snake in symbolism is the tempter of the garden, leading those seduced away from the proper path. But the image of the snake is also the same symbol that Moses is told to produce that will heal the descendants of Israel in the desert. This thread is then picked up by St. Paul when he writes about the crucifixion. Christ becomes the snake lifted up above the people for their healing. This can even be seen in the visual representation of Jesus on the cross. Many people have pointed out the serpentine nature of Jesus' twisting body during the crucifixion. In Isaiah 14, we have the story of Lucifer falling. Lucifer literally means the morning star. In Revelations, the symbol of the morning star is redeemed and returned to its proper place. In Revelations 22:13-16, Jesus says, "Look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give it to each person according to what they have done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may go through the gates into the city. Outside are the dogs who practice magical arts, and the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright morning star." If there's anything worth pursuing in this short life, it very well may look like the model that Jesus and St. Brigid gives us: redeeming what is good and being unafraid to condemn evil. St. Paul writes, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." When considering all of this, I remember that around 6 months ago I wrote a poem that rang particularly apt. I titled it "Sweet Exorcism." A dozen demons dance to my drumming heart, stomping short my breath, pushing paralytic panic, squeezing blood to saturate every vessel. Cooling tears are damned, the only relief in suppressed epileptic shaking. I cannot call out, I can hardly think, as lips speaking red words kiss my face. Hands marked by love wrap around an imp's torso. He crushes the devil under his palm, and another against his forehead, and another under a scarred heel. Parasites dig deep, yet my wounds are cooled by his breath. Profane spirits are gathered and pressed into shape. My exorcist presents me with the work of his hands, a crimson rose, with 12 holy petals and 7 golden thorns.